Welcome to Sky Notes. This week, Lillian talks with Alex Trenoweth about her recently published book, Zeus on the Loose. Alex is an award-winning astrologer, teacher, and author dedicated to unlocking children's potential through astrology. Thanks for joining us and welcome.
So thank you again for joining us, Alex.
Thank you for letting me join you.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. So we were both quite excited being fans of you already. And looking at Zeus on the Loose, we both got the book. We're really excited to read it. And I'm a Jupiter in Leo, so I only went and read my portion. And Tracy she said she wanted to read the whole book, but she's read quite a vast majority of it. And so when I think about your work, where I marvel and kind of want to start is, was it education first or astrology first? I'm curious.
I'm going to have to say it was education first, because
Yes.
I've known since I was 6 years old that I wanted to be a teacher. And my mom still has a little card that says, when I grow up, I want to be a teacher.
Wow.
So I knew from that age. But if you think about it, 6 years old is a critical Jupiter age. It's the first Jupiter opposition.
Yes.
And, I was just kind of a regular kid. I had a little bit of ADHD. I found it difficult to sit still. I had been very ill as a baby. I had meningitis and nearly died. So that's a story in itself. But there were a lot of concerns for my general health, although I was very robust. But there was always this lingering thing about there might be something wrong. It was my hearing. First of all, I was 9 months old. They thought I was going to die. Then they said I'd be, have profound learning difficulties if I did survive. Then it was all sorts of other things. And it felt to me, even as a young child, that I was kind of waiting for the axe to fall, that something would show up that would be wrong with me. And so I got away with a little bit of ADHD. And I don't know, I guess you could argue for the developmental delays, I guess. I don't know. But I got away in one piece, and I know meningitis survivors who, did not get so lucky. So, right. I feel very fortunate. Maybe that's my Jupiter on its exalted degree. I don't know. But so education came first, definitely.
Yeah, and part of that is because I wanted to know your Jupiter. So thank you for sharing that it's at an exalted degree. Can you share with our audience a little bit about what that exalted degree is and how it manifests for you?
Well, it's just looking at the table of dignitaries. And so for me, I mean, it falls in its second house in my chart, my Gemini rising. And I think for me, I have three planets in the second house, the Sun and Mars as well. So anything that I possess, I have a little story about it. I can tell you, everything about, you pick a mug, from my kitchen, and I can tell you who gave it to me or where I bought it. So, all my stuff, all my possessions that I value, have a little story behind it. But that's the memory of Cancer. I remember growing up, because as we teach children by academic year of a similar age, my fellow learners would be Jupiter in Cancer with a bit of Leo, Jupiter in Leo, and a little bit of Jupiter in Gemini. But I remember, growing up, that we were always very concerned about the children with special needs in our classroom. And we would be very distracted, making sure that that person got the care that they needed. And so understanding that really was the first point of writing Growing Pains, was thinking, yeah, that is how it was for me.
Yeah.
And understanding that emotional connection with learning that was so important for me. So that was my starting point. You have to own it before you can write about it, I think, or before you can sort of transfer it onto a different sign. But what also helped me to understand the other Jupiter signs is, of course, teaching. Yes. So I did, it was quite a big moment for me when I realized, because being a teacher, the educational system is faulty, and I know that. But, I really think that teachers suffer with all the expectations that, are thrust upon us. And, I could get into that later, but, I saw teachers come and go so quickly that they don't last, according to union guidelines, more than 5 years in the profession. Wow. So what we're seeing is people are leaving the profession before they get good at it. And I nearly joined that statistic because it's a tough
Yes,
job.
it is.
There's nothing, everything you just thrown into the deep end. And I
Yeah.
started working with teenagers,
Mhm.
which is its own challenges,
Yeah.
but I loved it.
Yes.
But th there was just this, you're overwhelmed, and it is a little bit like being on stage all the time.
Yes.
I don't know too many teachers who could just, roll out of bed and go into school. It's like you got to get yourself gird your loins before you go
Yeah.
in.
I
But I
worked for
remember,
a period, pardon me, I worked for a period at Microsoft, and there was a school teacher who had joined our team, and she was the most effective because they told her when she could go to the bathroom, and there were 30 kids yelling at her all the time, or not yelling, but vibing at her, right? And so her ability to handle ambiguity was tremendous. And I was asking about your Jupiter point to get to Jupiter Zeus on the loose, but one of the things that really I marvel at with your ability to overlay astrology onto education. As an astrologer, I'm following the daily transits, I'm following the moon. It would be a dizzying accomplishment to find that pattern. So, when did it move to Jupiter and Saturn? When did that click for you?
that's a very timely question. I was just about to get in my story that I was teaching my class, and they were being rowdy teenagers, and I just thought to myself, "Ah, this is not working for me." And I even remember what I was teaching. I was teaching Macbeth, and I was thinking in my head, I was a single parent. Um, I was born in the States, but I was living in England. I hadn't been in England for that long. And I just remember thinking this is not for me. And I was going to quit. But also I had this horrible heart tug that I would never be in this position again. That, if I walked away, if I went to my subject leader and said, I'm out of here, then I would never be in the situation again where I was going to actually live my childhood dream. And I turned around, looked at my class, and I thought to myself, hold on, you guys all have the same Jupiter sign, and you all have the same Saturn sign. And I have my Jupiter, my Saturn. And once I understood that, I realized I gotcha. Now I understand. So I'm not one of these teachers who has to wait until Christmas to understand my class. I know it from the 1st of September. I know it before, as soon as I get my timetable, what my classes are like, because I have Jupiter. And that is, a gift of astrology. Sun signs won't work in a classroom. It's too much information, especially if you work in a secondary school where you have a different class every hour. That is going to be, if I say, you can't work with that. I can't barely remember their names, let
Yeah.
alone remember their sun signs.
Yeah.
Although, like learning names, I might get to know the sun signs, but it's not going to help me. So
Yeah.
I think that the inner planets, Sun, Moon, Mercury, Mars, and Venus belong to the parents. That's a
Love that.
child's personality, and that's the parent's job. Jupiter and Saturn and a bit of Uranus, all mine. And so that's also helps me with making boundaries with parents as well.
That's
I
great.
can't do anything about a child's personality. It's not my role. My job is to educate.
Right. That's really good because when we were talking about the role of teachers, there's the children that can be difficult, but there are also the parents. They're experiencing different pressures. Maybe they don't think the child needs to study to get the accolades. And so they're going to pressure you to comply to make the child look better. Maybe they're not going to be emotionally able to face what their child is doing. And so I love that boundary. How does that show up? I come to you and my child has failed the test and I want to pin the blame on you. How do you handle that?
Okay, so let me back up a little bit and say when you
Yes.
and I were children, if I
Yes.
got in trouble at school, if I got bad grades, that was my problem. That was my fault, right?
Yes. Yes.
Nowadays, and I'm not sure when this started changing. Maybe it's, it was happening before the pandemic, but definitely happens a lot more now.
Mm.
Now it's my fault if a child fails. And I think it's time that teachers got off their knees and started fighting back on this. Okay, the things that we are asked to do, think about it. Okay, it is a system that's based on free babysitting.
Yeah.
It's based on the Industrial Revolution's needs.
Yes.
30 children to one teacher, one adult. And now we have all this neurodiversity. And, as I said, when I was a child, I didn't know it, but I had ADHD. And I wish that someone could have catered to me a little bit better.
Yes.
I didn't do badly in school, but, it might have helped me to have that little bit of time away from my studies, or
Yeah.
you go for a walk, or whatever. I wish that had been the case for me, but it wasn't. But if you're going to have all this neurodiversity, and it seems to me that we're really eager to put labels on different difficulties that a child might have in a classroom. Well, if that is the case, then we need more people in the classroom to help that one adult cater to those specific needs. We need
Absolutely.
more teaching assistants. And the other thing that really winds me up is, we kind of treat children like prisoners, and
Yes.
we do. We treat
Yeah.
them we
And
give them
teachers,
inferior food.
right?
Yeah. Well, true, and because I actually go against the idea that we're like prison guards. But we do have this thing about we feed them inferior food, the
Yeah.
cheapest food available. We keep them in. We don't let them go to the toilet, but there's a reason for that.
Hmm.
And all this mass thing and everything to do with saving money. The
Yeah.
best topics, the best subjects are arts, but they're the first subjects to get budget cuts. Boy, does that
Yeah.
make me mad. That
Yeah.
children need to express their creativity just as much as they need English, maths, and science. And boy, do I get wound up about budget cuts. And
I share that. Yeah. As an artist, I do fine art as well. And I remember repeatedly being told by our instructors, people will tell you art is useless, but if your doctor can't read an x-ray, that doctor's useless. People will tell you that you can't get anything from the visual world, but if your mechanic cannot see the difficulty in your automobile, that's a problem. And so there's a real, I would say, pushing visual world towards entertainment when it is critical for us to visually understand our world, especially when you bring in neurodiversities. And I share with you, as you know, I mean, I'm located in America, and right now all the GoFundMe's are going up for people who get paid to teach because they do not get supplies, which to me baffles me because, like you were saying, in my generation, we went to a fully stocked school, and it was designed to help expand what we were learning. And it was that little glimmery moment in the 70s where they said, let's figure out what you want to be and let's support that. And then that all went away in the US, I would say, right around the 80s.
mm. So I want to come back to the idea of letting children go to the toilet whenever they
Yeah,
want
I
to.
want to hear that.
That seems to be a really big thing, as well as using microwaves for at lunchtime.
Oh,
That
interesting.
seems to be a really big thing with parents. They're forgetting that there is only one adult in charge. And the number of ways a teacher can lose their job or get into big trouble seem to be like exponentially increasing every academic year.
Right.
I am not going to let a child handle hot food in my classroom.
No.
Okay, not just for the safety of that child, but for the safety of the 29 others, in
Yes.
case, we have somebody who's flipping tables, which
Yes.
shouldn't be happening in our classroom either.
Right.
One adult in charge. And going to the toilets, we know that children do coordinate
Yes.
with other classrooms to meet in the toilets. We know that because it's a private area, that things go on in the toilets that adults can't do anything about.
Yes.
Fights, all sorts of things that go on
Sure.
that in that classroom. I mean, in the toilets. And so that's why we're kind of strict. And if you think about it, we can't go to the toilet when we need to. The
No.
number of times I've had too much tea in the mornings and I had to, sort of grip my teeth until break. I can't leave that class unsupervised. And, if we're letting them go to have a little tinkle every time they get the urge, they're not training their bladder either, or
No.
whatever
They
else needs to be trained.
Yes,
So,
exactly. Those are good points. And it's the sort of touchstone for me that teachers are prisoners, right? Because
mm,
the notion of myself not being able to go to the bathroom when I want, I'm like, what? That's ridiculous. So I tend to think anyone would think that. So coming back to the Jupiter, what about this? You're coming, are you in session now? Are you teaching this year?
okay, so what I've done since I wrote Growing Pains, I started traveling a lot, and
Yes.
talk about being in a prison. I cannot take time off when I like. I don't
Yes.
have holiday that I can take. Everyone says, "Oh, isn't it nice to always have Christmas and Easter off, or the summer holidays?" And I'm like, "Do you think that we have a break? Do you think, we don't put in extra time? You
Right.
know, I'm often in school until 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening,
Yeah.
marking. Or if I'm marking in the classroom, it's a really intense day for me and I'm exhausted. But I teacher evenings, calling parents or parents calling me or whatever. So I put in the extra time. And if I add up all my overtime, a summer holiday doesn't really count. But um, so it's yeah, it is treating teachers like prisoners. And
Yeah.
so I can't get time off when I needed to travel. So I had to do what I think you guys call substitute teaching,
Yes.
which is day to day for me because and it also led to me going to primary school, elementary school, because in secondary school, if someone's absent for the day, the other staff members cover for them.
Oh, yeah.
So there's no
Yes.
day-to-day work. But in
Right.
primary school, you get more day-to-day work because it's one teacher, the same teacher for the whole class. So there's more opportunities for work in primary school. So, I never thought I'd teach younger children. In fact, I was a little bit scared of younger children. I was afraid I was going to screw them up. But I got used to it, and I really enjoy it. And I am one of those rare teachers that I teach all the way from nursery school all the way up to 18 years old. And I can fully, I've been in the profession for 25 years, and I fully credit astrology for allowing me to stay in because, like I say, my first day of student teaching, I was out of there.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. No, I understand what you're saying. And for me, when I started answering inquiries of readings for children, the first thing I noticed is that the newborn has the chart that I could have. Do you know what I mean? That detangling of expectation from this infant form. This little sweetie pie is not going to do anything for a couple of months. Well, yes, they are. They've got a lot going on. And if I respect that and support it, that changes the dynamic into a nourishing environment. So, but I was getting to, let's pick a Jupiter placement that you have recently experienced and let us know how that manifests in the classroom. And it could be Saturn as well, of course.
Well, of course, the babies that were born during the pandemic have either Jupiter in Pisces or Jupiter in Aries. So we have these children that were born under lockdown,
Yes.
that are their most important developmental years are the early years, but also
Yes.
adolescence, which I can get to in a second too. But that early socialization is so important. So the ones that are starting, from the pandemic, I'm not quite so worried about as the ones that were actually missing nursery and kindergarten that would now be 9 and 10 years old.
Okay.
Those are the ones I'm worried about because we noticed that when they started school in year one, that they had developmental speech delays
Ah,
because
that's
they weren't allowed to socialize. And I was speaking to my friend who I'm staying with here in Cornwall, and he was just saying that when his daughter was born, she was born in the pandemic, she only knew her parents and her
right.
grandmother. That's
Right.
it. It's not like, when a baby's born, they pass around from relative to relative, get used to different smells, which is very
Yes.
important, and
Yes.
the way each adult feels when they're being held.
Yeah.
Well, children born during the pandemic didn't get that. And I think
Wow.
that stimulation does make a difference, and we're going to see it, I
Yeah.
think, in terms of behavior.
Yeah.
And talking about behavior, these children that grew up, missing school, gaps
Yes.
there's gaps in learning. It's like a scar
Yeah.
that runs all the way through. I mean, I think adults are scarred enough, but the children, they miss things. There's a whole entire year group that can't tell time on an analog clock
Right.
because they missed it in school. And because at
Right.
home, of course, they have digital clocks.
Right.
There are children whose handwriting suffers because they didn't learn those skills when they were little. Or they
Yes.
didn't practice it because, parents' idea of educating them is giving them an iPad or something. Um, Sorry,
It
but
can be. It can be. No, I wanted to share, I've recently moved from the Pacific Northwest to the South. And I have the great privilege of getting to see my husband's family work with grandchildren. And I know my husband had really good education and he's successful and he's articulate and has interesting hobbies. But I hadn't yet seen how many vocabulary tests those children got at their grandparents' house and how it went vocabulary, math, let's get outside and do something. Can you identify this plant? Can you do this? And it's a level of rigor that I, who did not have grandparents, never saw. I got it later in adolescence. I went and worked with my sister and did all sorts of like pre-adult, office work kind of tryout. But this sort of magnificent practical layout of the skills that you'll need, also matched by what kind of conversation are we going to have at dinner? Was there anything that you have as a subject that you want to bring up to the rest of us? Is there a joke you want to tell? It completely upended how I feel, because I was raised with people who were stretched way too thin. And so I was in the way, the resources weren't there, they loved me, but it was sort of a tough time. How can I be less of a problem? And, you can sort of minus yourself out of existence with that kind of environment. So thank goodness I had that Jupiter and Leo and loved myself so much and was like, oh, this is a passing thing, no problem. But it struck me about the grandparents providing that, right? Like giving all of that structure to these children.
That's amazing. But I would say that that's really on the
Rare.
Rare, yes, because I think a lot of children were allowed to do whatever they wanted to do during the pandemic. And I know in the early days here in England, most children wear a school uniform, which I have to say I love.
I do. Yeah.
Because it's less washing for the parents, and you don't have to worry about what to wear for the kids, and it's just easy. But I know people want to argue with me on that, but let's leave that for the moment and go to, a lot of children were allowed to do whatever they wanted to do during the pandemic because the parents had things to do, and it was hard. It was difficult not having that free babysitting.
Yes.
And therefore, when parents think that they're going to march up to the school gates and shout at a teacher, I just want to say, listen, teachers are real people with real emotions, and they are doing a difficult job, and they provide a service that you can't provide and you don't want to provide. And you think that you're going to be entitled to. When your child turns of a certain age, you can send them off to someone else's care for 6 hours. And when you upset somebody emotionally, it has a knock-on effect. Because I've been shouted at by teachers unfairly, I got to say. Oh, sorry, by parents unfairly, I got to say. And it took me a while to get my confidence back. And it wasn't because the parent was right. It was because the way that they approached me, like I was, a servant. Right. As opposed to somebody who spent, 8 years in postgraduate education, or somebody who has my own achievements, my own accomplishments outside the educational and top of the life experience.
Yes.
And, it can be, it's so unfair when parents take it out on teachers, and they have to bear in mind free babysitting, be nice to your teachers. And I do not want a teacher appreciation day. You appreciate me every single day.
Yes. I love that. That's so good. That's genius. That is really funny. So what I'm hearing, if I can reflect it back, is if we go back to 2020, 2021, 2022, we're talking about Jupiter in Pisces. No, we're talking about Neptune in Pisces, Saturn in Pisces. And so you're not so worried about those kids, Saturn in Pisces and Aries, but the next group perhaps may need additional support in learning all of these sort of, don't you think of these, I think of these as antecedents to technology. An analog clock is, good technology, but right now it's not popular. So it's good to learn, like a manual car shift. But what if we get public transportation instead? Yeah. There's that tension between what comes before and what comes after. How do you juggle that with children?
Yeah. So what if the internet went down? If there was something that happened that we lost the internet?
Yes.
Well, there goes my banking. There goes so many different ways of communicating that is gone.
Yes.
And I think, sticking to the old way, there is some value in that, just in case, because, we had a pandemic. We never thought that would happen. And, so I think it is good that, it's not too far removed from telling time on a sundial.
Absolutely.
What is wrong with looking at the sky and saying, okay, the sun is going down, so therefore it must be, depending on the time of year, it must be 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock or whatever. So I just think that it leads to broader thinking, and transferable skills in different areas. You're learning logical thinking, critical thinking, Which brings me to AI.
Oh, I want to hear. I know you did a interview, but I tried not to crib off of all of your interviews, don't you know?
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, yeah, I think it was with Louise Eddington. We let
Yes.
AI ask our questions, and Louise and I both think that AI has its purpose, and so this is Louise Eddington, the Cosmic
Yes.
Owl,
We're
who has
having
a
her
book on.
next week to talk about Ceres.
Excellent. We kind of shadow each other, and it's really
Yes.
funny because she's a Brit living in the United States, and I'm an American living in. So we have this advantage in that we get the double jokes. Like
Yes.
we think it's hysterical when we're cracking British jokes and the Americans don't get it, or the other way around, because we understand and we get both sides of the story. But anyway, so we were talking about, it has its purpose, but think about how much we rely on AI to like do simple things. I've been trying to try out AI with things like writing social media posts or writing
Yeah.
my blog, things
Yes.
that would take me a couple hours of thinking process and going back and editing and putting things in a better order so it makes more sense. But if I rely on AI for doing that, it's yeah, sure, it saves me time and I can do other things. But then my day is filled up with more and more and more and more tasks that AI needs to do for me. But if we lose AI, lose that, where does it leave us? So
Right.
there's that. So I think the AI has, it can do an amazing things, but I think, we need to consider there is value in learning algebra. No matter what people say, oh, there goes a full day. I didn't use algebra. Are you kidding? You use algebra all the time. You just don't
You use
use,
it all the
you don't realize that you're
your
using it.
body's made of it. You can't get away
Yeah,
from that. It's just not
well,
possible.
you're cooking, you're dealing with your finances, you're using account, you're doing all sorts of stuff that uses algebra. So I get a little bit hot on the collar when I see those kind of posts. Oh, another day that I didn't use that skill, or this is something I didn't learn in school. Well, are you serious? Well, Mark Twain said there are two types of education: the one you pay for and the one you give yourself. And so why are people going, why I didn't learn that in school. Well, get off your ass and learn
Yes,
something
sure. Yes.
of your own
So,
accord.
yeah, and going back to the AI, I'm super curious about it. I worked at Microsoft for 14 years, started in social media, and then expanded into custom programs for advertisers. And in social media, I'm quite aware of chat bots, visual chat, all of these kind of adjunct experience to you and I talking to each other, where you replace that with what I would describe, well, they call it a large language model. And what that does is it picks up what you're talking about. Like you're saying, it identifies patterns and organizes them for you. But that's it. It's a solitary cell, right? And I looked up recently in the US where AI is getting its information from, and it's reddit.com. And I'm not sure
Yeah.
if you're familiar with Reddit, but I'm not going to Reddit necessarily for good information. I'm going there to see what gossip's going on. I'm going there to see what crazy things are going on in politics. And so if you think about that, even if it's just me, which I would love an AI that you can download and customize so that it actually just gets to know who you are and spits out the language that you keep using and shreds it up and gives you interesting ways to look at it. But because it's just that, there's no new information. And I think that that's what people forget. It's just recombining. And so, like you're saying, if you give up the practice of analyzing your own information to organize it, you will lose the skill of organizing your own information. You have handed it over to this large language model that can be quite inaccurate. I'm not saying it is, but I'm just saying, whoa, I want to be able to analyze. I want to be able to have those skills. Like you say, I have a flashlight, I have a torch in case the lights go off, right? Because I want to be prepared. So I don't want to hand off all of my thinking because there are tools in there that I'm sharpening all of the time. And I'm not giving those away. So I'm going to keep my stuff. However, I've done videos on show me an eclipse for people who live largely outside and have no power. So they're looking at the night sky and render for me how that would feel in the daytime, and you get really weird results, but they're kind of evocative and they spark my brain so I can go back and do that work. So that's my 2 cents on AI. Apart from being really empathetic, because I do not think it's a money maker. And I think we'll find that out soon. And so it'll be a very different landscape for us all. And then the other thing I'll say is I went back and got my research guides from college. And so I wanted to know your take on that. I thought, oh, back in the 70s, there weren't all of these compiled worldwide intelligence sources that people had been contributing to for over 25 years. All we had was the Encyclopedia Britannica and advice from librarians. So can we go back to that? Is there
Do you remember the old-fashioned microfiche? Do you remember
of
those?
course, that was so exciting, right?
Do you remember the mimeograph where you had to,
Absolutely. That was my favorite thing to do in school. Send me out
I
to
love
get
the smell of the papers.
yes, exactly.
So yeah, things change an awful lot, but I remember, maybe 20 years ago, there was a sort of a recognition that we are training our students for jobs that don't even exist yet.
Yes.
And I also know that my students know technology better than I do.
Yes.
There was a time when, I would hand my iPhone to my daughter to ask her to do something. And I still do sometimes ask her opinion, on, how can I adjust my settings to do this? So yeah, there are, us, Generation X and boomers and all that. We do need a little bit of help with the technology, but I'm afraid to say, there's a lot of skills that I have too. I'm not dead yet. I still have things I can offer. But
Absolutely.
let's think about, AI and astrology.
Yes.
And there's a lot of things that AI can do. So I think it might be that the sun sign columns that we're so used to in the newspapers might be finished. I hate to, because all you're going to do is put in AI. Well, what's in
Yeah.
it for Cancer?
Yeah.
But we've lost the human touch.
Right.
So, we've lost that the Leo-ness, the individual, the star quality that we were used to with the sun sign columnists. And now, we're having to go, rely on AI. However, the reason why I didn't sleep well last night was because I was up most of the night struggling with AI, trying to come up with, because I've written Mirror Mirror and it's about famous people and actors who
Yes.
portrayed them, helping me to come up with accurate data of when a movie is released.
Oh.
And it would give me all sorts of wild times. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I've asked you, when is the movie released? And you've given me the wrong date, the wrong month. Never mind trying to get it to, I've asked it all sorts of things, generate a chart for whatever, and they'll come up with absolute rubbish.
Yes.
So I think we're a long way from, we shouldn't be worried about AI taking over things like a consultation.
Right.
As long as we have the human touch, we still have a role to play in society. It's like counseling. Although I have to say too, I ran a problem through AI, a personal relationship problem through AI, and talked it through, and it was very helpful. Probably it would have taken a year to sort out with a counselor one-to-one.
Isn't that
But
something?
But this too is the advantage of astrology. A good astrologer can look at a chart, look at the transits and its progressions and say, aha, I know what the problem is.
Right.
Let's talk about this, and gives a person that space. We have a way of focusing in on it, which I think AI is far, far, far away from being able to do.
Yes. Yeah. So I like the idea of the stability that you get from older techniques, like knowing how to research without the internet and then applying them during the internet age. Because if there's one thing technology is good for, it's being frustrating. It connects us all, but when and how? And I've spent hours yelling at the computer because it won't do a thing I want it to do. And lately I've been like, just do it at the computer. Tell the computer you're sorry. No one will have to hear it. You can have that. But to get back to the Jupiter Saturn structure, Jupiter on the loose, what is the biggest message you want folks to come away with, or the most concrete message?
I think it's looking away from sun signs and focusing, if we're talking about educating a child, because aside from a child's general health, their education is a parent's the biggest concern.
Yes.
And, so as a teacher, I wanted to focus on the learning process, which is a Jupiter function, not a Mercury function.
Right.
So I'll explain that because a lot of astrologers want to argue with me about that. So the Mercury function is rote learning. So
Yes.
when a teacher holds up the letter T to the class, and what sound does this make? The class is t t t t. So that's Mercury learning. That's Mercury was a messenger god. He only repeated, what he heard. That was his job. And he could go everywhere, of course he could, but he was only repeating what he heard. But with Jupiter takes those sounds to form words, to form sentences, to form paragraphs, to form essays. It expands, it keeps going.
Yeah.
And that is Jupiter. That is learning. It's that
Yeah.
leap of faith, the confidence it takes to say, okay, I know that 2 + 2 = 4. Therefore, I can multiply 2, until the end of time. And because I know that 2 + 2 is 4.
Yeah.
And I can apply it to different numbers, and I can do all sorts of things with numbers. And so, I really wanted parents to think, away, and teachers away from sun signs and looking
Yeah.
at what really matters in education, which is a Jupiter sign, and helping the children to understand and parents to understand the most important time of a child's life, which is, I'm going to say, the Jupiter return at around 11 or 12, which coincides with all the major brain development that goes on in adolescence. That's a part of adolescence. Your brain rewires itself. And therefore, the habits of a lifetime are formed in those years between the first Jupiter return and the first Saturn opposition a few years later. And we kind of recognize this, not in astrological terms, but we send our children to middle school or to secondary school at around the time of the Jupiter return. We send them to high school around the time of the Saturn opposition. Here in England, we prepare them for exams around the time of the Saturn opposition. So we kind of reflect that, just don't call it astrology.
Right.
But I think if a parent can understand when these things happen, how they happen, and what to do about them, they're ahead of the game. And astrologers can really help contribute to, a parent who has a teenager is under enormous, or a teacher,
Oh,
they're
yes.
under enormous stress because
Yeah.
13 is the most challenging year of your life. When I ask people about being 13, they're always embarrassed. I'm embarrassed.
Yeah.
I did stupid things and I thought everybody was noticing me.
Yeah.
But if you understand 13, that's also the time of the Jupiter and Uranus sextiles. So Jupiter is sextile its natal position at the same time Uranus is having its first Ptolemaic aspect from an outer planet, Uranus sextile Uranus. So you put those keywords together, just the keywords, you got
Yeah.
big rebellion.
Yeah.
So it's an important time and how to manage that. We know that 13, the teenage years, are when children stop paying attention to what their authority figures say and are more concerned with what their peers say. There's socialization, not just physical things. We focus on sexual relationships, which is so important to talk about your children about. Please talk to your children about sex,
Yes.
because even if you want to pretend that they're not having sex, they are.
What
And
would
you
you
need to
say?
teach
So
them.
you say talk to them. A lot of people could say you're not dating until you're 26, right? That's talking to them. What are you talking about talking to them?
I'm talking, they're let's be grim. They're already exposed to pornography.
Right.
Forget about filters, forget
Right.
about, and children know that,
Yes.
they don't want their parents don't want them to know, so they're
Yeah.
hiding it. And
Yeah.
they know more about sex than you and I do
Yeah.
because
So
they're
you would,
overexposed to it. You and I don't want to hear about it because, some aspects of it are pretty disgusting
oh, it's too
to
much.
us.
Yeah, it's too
Yeah,
much.
it's
I
too
don't
much.
even have children, and it's too much to get into this conversation. All I can think is sort of from my own limited perspective, right? Learning about consent changed my life. Being a young lady and finding other young ladies to support me helped me tremendously to learn not to cater to men, I guess I would say, and pay attention to myself. And that has stood the test of time through my life. So to me, those would be important things to learn, but it's according to your own values, right? You would assert your values with your child around sex.
Yes, absolutely. But what I mean about talking about sex is teaching your children that sex is more than just a physical thing. There's an
Yeah.
emotional tie, there's a commitment, there's all sorts of things that they're not going to learn from the cheap porn that they're exposed to. There's more to it. And that's where I think parents, the mechanics, yeah, I think you should talk to your children about the mechanics of sex.
Sure.
Um, and the other thing you mentioned, now I know this is a touchy subject because
Mhm.
there's a lot of gender fluidity, but I'm just saying that I think that at that tender age, the um, however you identify, in terms of sexuality, you should there should be a separation there, because that way girls can get used to their cycles
Yes.
without boys. I think boys should be taught about periods too, but they can get used to their cycles. They can, try to concentrate in class without having some boy ping their bra strap in class, because we know that the brain development starts first with girls.
Oh,
So
masterful.
boys start having that brain development about a year after. So that's why they think the height of, laughter is discovering that girls have hair under their arms.
Right, right, right.
And
Well,
and
and it's right. Isn't it correct to say that empathy develops in your 20s and that before that you may be compassionate, but really this is something that's part of the final, you know, capping off. I wanted to share what I heard back, reflect back what I heard, which was um, the mechanical realities of the body are critically important regardless of your gender identity. And so having folks share those realizations, regardless of where they fall in how they feel that they arise, but just to say, yes, that's normal. I remember,
yeah,
again, hearkening back to my age, we had Free to Be You and Me, right? And there was one page, my mom got me the book before I started my period. Isn't she lovely? And there was a page of women with all the different kinds of boob shapes they could have. And I think that saved me maybe $10,000 in therapy in the US because just knowing that they could show up in any form or factor and that that was perfectly fine was like, oh, well, that's easy. So sometimes it really sets the child up for that maintaining confidence that I'm hearing from you. So what happens when confidence goes the other way and they're too
well, there, we Jupiter needs to be contained as well. You know, um, Zeus was not a loyal husband.
right?
He did a lot of things that, we would recognize as not being very attractive.
Mm-hmm.
And so Jupiter does need the Saturn there to contain it. Now, in the human life experience, usually we have our Jupiter critical stages before we have our Saturn stages. So what happens is, Jupiter makes a mess, Saturn comes along and cleans it up.
Uh,
So Jupiter expands and makes that mess, and Saturn comes along and practices it, makes us do the hard work to put it back in order. And so that's our experience until we get to 60. Now, I'm in the middle as it happens. I'm not quite 60 yet, but I'm in the middle of my fifth Jupiter return and my second Saturn return. And because as an astrologer, I was prepared. I've actually had a very, very, very good Saturn return. And when I think back to my first Saturn return, it wasn't terrible, but if I had known about astrology, it could have been better. And I think that Saturn returns can be a positive thing because it's like taking an exam. And by the way, we might come back to this. I'm in favor of the exam systems.
uh,
So when you take exams and you practice and you pass with flying colors, there's a sense of achievement. And I think that's what Saturn brings to us is that sense of, boy, that was difficult. That was hard work, but I got through it. And you can apply it to anything, even the most grim things, a serious injury. Not that these happen all the time in Saturn
right.
returns, or a bereavement or whatever. You can think, okay, that was horrible. When my father died, it was the worst, it was awful. But now when I look back on the experience and look at how I managed it, I was on the day my father died, I was actually doing a webinar.
Uh,
And, I had to park all my grief aside to do this webinar. And I was determined, that I am not going to crumble during this webinar. I'm going to do this thing. And
yeah.
when I did it, yeah, it was difficult. Oh, of course it was. But when I did it, I thought, yeah, okay. You see, I can manage my emotions and I can find a better way of dealing with them. I was very angry when my father died, by the way. That's where you see
Yeah.
all my gym shots in the
Yeah.
gym,
Oh,
taking
I
out my
love
anger.
that. I love that. So good.
Yeah, so when you go through difficult times and you find ways of coping with them that don't involve you, you know, turning the anger on yourself in
Right.
whatever way that manifests, you come away with thinking, okay, yeah, I got through that. Somehow I got through it all. And
Yes.
that's the way Saturn can reward you. So yeah, challenging, difficult, but ultimately it's a sense of achievement. And when we talk about exams and testing in
Yes.
schools, you're going to be examined and tested all your life, whether
Yes.
it's the dentist examining you, a doctor examining you, your banker. The list goes on and on and on about different ways you're going to be tested. And I think children need to learn how to develop methods of dealing with that kind of stress instead of
Yeah.
taking it away and making the world a sterilized environment where they don't have to experience stress and anxiety, because it's a part of the human existence, I'm afraid,
Yes.
dealing with
It
stress and
is.
anxiety.
It is. Yeah. In fact, I believe personally that the realities of life and how we can lose people and how things can happen are a sufficiency, and that war is a bad way to go, and that it's not necessary if we're managing stuff. But that's my idealistic claptrap. So we'll just put that where that goes. But I love what you're saying, because I remember being in school and I had a really dysfunctional family. There was a lot of tragedy and loss. And I would go to school and they'd say, we want you to lead a pretend shop. And so you'll be running the cashier. And I was maybe 7 or 8. And it was very scary, but also that confidence, they thought I could do it. So maybe I could do it. And gosh, I had the most fun. And then, I would try to do it again and it would kind of biff. And so I love what you're saying about the confidence comes and then you work it. The confidence comes and then you work it. And that school can be that safe container that allows that to happen, you know. I think that's really quite lovely. And I love that idea expanded to exams. I tested well, so I never really had an issue with exams. But I remember when they started doing advanced placement courses in the US, where you would start to take college courses. And
Mhm.
those required an amazing amount of focus. And so even that, I feel like just giving children a chance to focus on work is such a lovely opportunity for kids.
Well, the so-called modern education system, coming back to the Industrial Revolution, when
right.
public education was first brought to prominence. I think the year was 1890 in the UK. I think that's right. Um,
Okay.
this idea that you could send your child to school while the parents went out to work also protected children from the factories
Yeah.
themselves, because
Wow.
child exploitation was a big problem, at least in Victorian England. And so schools have a true function, but society has changed and schools have not.
Right.
And so, if we're talking about, helping children deal with stress and anxiety, and we're telling them, oh, if you don't pass this test, you're not going to get in this school or do that course or whatever, but we're not putting in the resources to help them cope with that, like school counselors. Okay, one school counselor for a school. Are you kidding? You know,
In the
uh,
US, I was going to become a school counselor. A friend of mine does it for a living, and I job shadowed her, and she had 3 schools in the US. That was her job. And then we would go, and the face to face with these children who were being heard was so transformative and amazing. I couldn't believe it. And then she shared that the reason why they were asking for more school counselors was because of the increased incidence of gun violence in the United States. And I thought, wow, what a thing to have counselors hold the bag for. That's ridiculous. And yet, here we are. But that's such a heavy topic. I don't necessarily want to bring that into this. But to your point, school counselors, one per school is absurd. We want a lot
yeah.
more people on your team working with these children, right? Like, what would be the ideal?
I mean, I think that you can't have too many school counselors. Um, we just need a lot more. Instead of having a tenth of a percent per population, we have a little bit more equity there. And you were talking about school shooters, and I cannot believe how open campuses are in the States. Here in England, all the schools are like fortresses. You
Ah,
you you can't walk into a reception area where you come in to check in, or parents aren't allowed to walk. Nobody, unless you're vetted, with police clearance, let alone a gun. We don't have we have much stricter gun laws here
Of
in
course.
England. But
Yes.
you can't come into a school. The gates outside are locked.
That's so interesting. I'll be
But I
curious.
I remember seeing my niece's school, and I'm like, are you, wow, I can just walk right into the school and no one's going to stop me. I don't even live in this country and I can walk into that school. You haven't checked me. You don't know who I am.
When I went on the job shadow, I was checked in at every location, but it's because my friend was in compliance. So to your
Mm.
point, I believe that in the United States, there's a complete over reliance on people complying when there is nothing of the sort going on. And we need to kind of, like you say, change. I don't know what the change is. I don't have a disheartening answer for the change. Everybody wants to feel a sense of relief and enjoyment in their life. And things are so chaotic right now. I don't know if you still feel that, like, the pandemic isn't really over. About 2,000 people are dying per day in America from COVID. There's a whole different approach to keeping the air clean. There's all of the strange things about the grooming that happens online that makes our children so vulnerable. You were talking about children having access to porn. Well, I was sharing a couple of weeks ago. Do you remember ICQ? The free messenger message device that would connect you to everybody around the world. The common greeting was, how old are you? Where are you located? And what sex are you? Can you imagine in this day and age? And that was just 30 years ago. So, in the scope of time, that's really not that long. So, there's how do we fortress our internet, or how do we create the appropriate containers for children? And school is one of the biggest containers, as you're saying. So, I just, my hat's off to you. I want to finish or come to a final bit that can go as long as it wants, because I
Before we
heard
get there,
say,
can I
yeah,
give you my answer to
oh,
that
sorry.
problem? The answer is parents being more aware of how the children are educated, not just packing up their book bag and sending them off to school, but being aware of what actually happens in there, taking an interest. Okay, if your child is showing difficulties and there's a way of communicating with the school does have resources to help that child, but they're going to be available for everybody there. But you
Okay.
as a parent, if you have that good feedback from the school, good relationship, which is why I'm saying please don't shout at teachers because
Yes.
they can help you out. If you upset them, how are they going? They're trying to control themselves. They can't help you once
Yes.
you know, freak them out.
Yeah.
But there is a way that parents can be more involved in their education without overloading or being overprivileged or whatever. And that is, that really good communication with the school. And so the parents can put things in place themselves
Yes.
instead of just saying, oh, I'm sending my child off to school. Better nutrition at home is a
Yes.
good place to start.
Oh, that's
Um,
good.
and uh,
That's good.
being careful what you say at the dinner table about your teacher or your schools, because that child needs to build a relationship with the teachers as well. Teachers will say off things. I once called a kid a prick in class, but he was being a prick, and I said, "Yep, prick, Prick. That is you. If you use a kind of racist language in my class again,
Very
I'm going to
cute.
call you more words that you're not going to like." And I was like, "Oh my God, I just signed my
Oh gosh.
sacking papers." But this is
Oh,
20 years ago and it wasn't so bad. And the kid, when I see him on the street, he recently thanked me. Thanks for calling me a prick. I was being a prick. And I appreciate you pulling me up for it because now I learned that lesson where you wouldn't dare say it today.
that accountability, that is a real gift that teachers can give. But I do still, and thank you for your answer and not letting me steamroll you. The next piece, though, I'm so curious because I've been reading about, are astrologers conservative or liberal, right? And there was a really interesting article a few years ago that came out that referred to, if it was not conservative, then how could it be that India, a country of such vast religion, embraces astrology? And I bring that up because who told you your work was not being appreciated enough and that you should turn your sights on India?
Um,
Naomi Bennett, yes?
So let me, yes, it was Naomi Bennett. Yeah, sorry, the question surprised me. It was her. She did say that, yeah, it was exactly. I remember, and the whole entire thing about meeting Naomi Bennett was rather miraculous. I met her at my first international conference, an Easter conference, and I was going to visit an old professor friend in Austin, Texas. And
Mhm.
we were at the dinner, and she passed me by, and she had a badge on that said President of the Austin Astrological Society.
Oh, wow.
And I said, "Hey, I'm going to Austin." And immediately, without even thinking, she says, "Oh, you can stay with me. You can give a talk to my group." And this is within a few weeks. So there I was in Naomi Bennett's house in Texas, never been to Texas before. And we were talking about astrology, and she did say that you should try India. And we ended up at the same conference, although she hadn't mentioned that specific conference. We ended up together in India, and I thought before I went on stage, because we had the big cameras, the huge
Yes.
screen, and it was like being a rock star. And I thought
Yes.
to myself, do it like you're never going to get another chance. I
Good.
channeled Janis Joplin, and I went on that stage, and I gave it my best shot, and I ended up winning an award. But India can teach us about what we should do and what we need to do in conferences in terms of getting astrology back up there on its
Yes.
where it should be. Think
Yes.
about what astrologers do. We've already fought through the gauntlet of people thinking that we're nutters, or uneducated, because the majority of astrologers I know, are extremely intelligent,
Same.
and well read, are book hoarders, and are used to all the arguments. Whenever someone says to me, "Oh, what about precession?" I'm just like, "Well, why don't you tell me what you know about precession?"
Yeah.
Turn it back on their ear. Oh, how can there just be 12 types of people in the world? Turn it what? Well, you tell me what you think you know about being a Taurus. Let's hear
Yes.
it.
Yes.
And they'll give you some, something, and then you're like, but your chart is more than that. It gives you an opportunity to talk to people. Although I do get tired of the same questions, the twin questions, blah, blah, blah. I get tired of saying the same thing, but people need to do their homework.
Right.
Instead of saying to the astrologer, "Why do you think astrology works?" Well, why do you think it doesn't work? Why do you do your work yourself? Stop being so lazy.
Those are low level skeptics. The real skeptics,
Yeah.
I find, become astrologers. Is that something that resonates for you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because my mom was reading the horoscope columns to me when I don't know, I was a young teenager,
Sure.
and I'm a Cancer,
Hmm.
and she says, "Oh, Cancers are home loving and shy." And I was like, okay, I guess astrology is a load of rubbish then. And she's a Sagittarius. And of course, hers was very favorable, adventurous, and outgoing. My mother was a homebody, you know.
Yes. Yes.
So I just thought, well, okay, I guess astrology is, not for me. And until when someone asked me what sign I was, because my birthday is the 20th of July, I'd
Mhm.
always say on the cusp of Leo.
Mhm.
I'd never owned to be in Cancer, but a friend of mine did charts, and she did my chart, because she said, "Are you a Leo?" And just to be artsy, I said, "No, I'm a Cancer." And she said, "Well, I bet you have the moon in Leo or something." And she did this chart for me, which is why, I think that we should always remember that learning how to draw charts has its uses. You're not just
Yes.
typing it your smartphone and showing somebody. That you can actually manually calculate a chart, at least a
Yes.
rudimentary one. It's quite an important skill. Anyway, she did this chart for me, and lo and behold, I do have the moon in Leo. And more importantly, I'm a Gemini rising with my Mercury in Leo. So that's
Nice.
why I felt like a Leo. So it's yeah. So that's how really yeah, as a skeptic, and then I got hooked and got more and more and more involved in it.
So the skeptics, if they do their work, they might get a lot more out of astrology.
Yeah, I was banned from using or talking about being an astrologer to my students in my
Sure.
school, but my colleagues knew, because they they had more access. I mean, kids might have had access to my website as well. But I was in charge of behavior for my particular year group, and all us learning managers, everyone in charge of the year group, we were sitting in the office and we were having a bad day.
Uh,
And we had all these incident reports coming in, and it was just one of those days where it just seems like there's so much to manage. And my colleague said to me, "Must be a full moon." And I was like, wow, no, it's a new moon actually. And that got me started off on what became my PhD thesis for in India.
Yeah.
Actually, it's the new moon when children play up, and I got 30,000 incident sheets to back me up. But the other thing was my colleagues knew as an astrologer, and we had a visiting author, and I'll even say his name as he had such strong opinions of astrology. He said, his name is Matthew Said, he wrote the book Bounce. He
Mhm.
said, I don't know why astrologers persist in their um, understanding of astrology when it's all been proven wrong. So all my colleagues turned around to look at me,
Oh,
and this guy, Matthew Said, was a ping pong player, and he had the idea of the 10,000 hour rule. You practice something for 10,000 hours, you become a master. Well, I said, I'm not a ping pong player, but I wouldn't dare say, question whether or not ping pong was a sport, let alone a sport for a man.
beautiful. Beautiful.
Because, what does he know? He doesn't know anything about astrology, and he's saying he's basing his opinions on, you know, um, some paper, some treatise that was signed in 1982 or something, 40
Sure.
years ago.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. And there's plenty of data. There's plenty of people who have researched it. And I heartily agree with you. We've had people who have taught themselves how to translate from Greek. In our community, of course, we have multiple PhDs for language and education. And we're going to have Laura Tad on, and her PhD thesis was, do astrologers have poverty consciousness? And does that map to reality? And I just was like, I'm in love because I need to know. And also, how did you do this study and how marvelous? And so I think that there's a wealth of information from the people who also are into astrology. So
yeah, I think we're so blessed that,
yes.
there's so many different opinions, and astrology is so vast that, I always say that, we speak the language of the stars, but we all have our different accents.
Ooh, I love that. I love that a lot. Well, this has been marvelous. And again, how gracious of you to tackle us when you could. And I'm so glad we had this time. And Tracy sends her hellos.
Oh,
She's
happy
off.
birthday, Tracy.
Yeah, she's
Yes.
off birthday. And we're going to get this online today. So I hope
Fantastic.
you have a great evening, and
Thank
we'll see
you.
you soon.
Thank you very much, Lillian. Take care. Nice
Take
to
care.
meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you too. All right. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.